Hello, this is Dean.
Hey,
there
so
we go.
Dean and Chris, everybody.
So yeah, I'm Dean Takahashi. I'm the lead writer for GamesBeat at VentureBeat, and been doing that for almost 10 years now. I also run the GamesBeat conferences, and we have our next conference coming April 9th and 10th in Berkeley, called the GamesBeat Summit, and I have left some cards in the back for a 30% off discount if anybody's interested, or you could just ask me for a discount card too. And happy to be here with Chris Hewish, Executive Vice President of Skydance Interactive. He came over recently from Survios. So I'm going to have Chris fill you in more on his background.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dean. And thank you, everybody, for being here today. So, yeah, I've been in the games industry for about 25 years, and through a lot of different cycles. Joined Skydance almost a year ago, and you know, I got into games right out of college. I'd been a gamer sort of all my life as a kid, and took a shot at jumping in with the company that I sort of loved the games the most from, which was Games Workshop. And just a funny anecdote, when I sent my resume over to them, I added a cover letter that I wrote in the sort of voice of a orc war boss. And it was a letter of recommendation from an orc war boss in their universe, in their fiction. And that opened the doors and got me into the games industry. And from there, Microprose, Activision, and DreamWorks Animation. And, yeah.
And so what was interesting to you about VR, and like, you know, why have you focused on it?
So, you know, after I was at DreamWorks Animation, I got into mobile a little bit, as a lot of people did. And I did a little startup that didn't work out, so I was looking at what my next move would be. And it was either, you know, go in and do more mobile gaming, or a buddy of mine said, you know, you should really come over and check out this company called Survios. They're doing some VR work. And like a lot of people, I was a little, you know, I hadn't really experienced VR in its current iteration, and I was a little unsure. And but I went over anyway and got an early demo of what would become raw data, and full room scale VR, and I was just blown away. And I'm like, I get it now. This is awesome. And that ability to just really get drawn in to a whole new world and just embody the fantasy of being a badass and being a hero and seeing these new worlds and interacting with them in a direct way really hooked me and got me to be a believer.
So we all sort of know that VR isn't doing as well as expected. You know, how does that sort of affect what you're thinking about now?
Sure, it's, you know, not to be sort of contrarian or anything, but I think VR is doing well. There were some big, I think, projections and hype around how it would come storming out of the gate. When I say it's doing well, I mean in the sense of, if you look at most new electronics or home sort of entertainment electronics, they follow a slow sort of ramp up in the initial few years. And we're seeing encouraging signs of that, where the adoption rate of VR is kind of matching the adoption rate of some other early electronics that came into the home. And so on that front, that's encouraging. I think we, you know, certainly, if, you know, looking at the Gartner hype cycle, we're definitely in the trough of disillusionment right now. And
is there a sign you see that that sort of signals that this isn't like 3D glasses, which were sort of truly faddish? I guess?
Yes. You know, I think a couple of things. You know, we're already seeing a second sort of round or generation of hardware coming out, which indicates that the big money behind it, or the manufacturers behind it, see that there's value in iterating and evolving the hardware. You know, we're seeing a broad adoption of VR in location-based entertainment. You know, I think what we're still looking at right now is there's in-home VR, and then there's location-based VR. And both of those, when combined, kind of make a market. But we're certainly, I think the verdict is still out on which one will become dominant, or is there room for both over the next few years.
So by the way, has anybody here seen Beyond the Void, just a couple blocks away, the Star Wars VR experience? Anyway,
yeah, it's pretty awesome.
So, anyway, so Skydance as well. Tell us a bit more about that, maybe. I mean, you know, I think generally people may know that you know, Skydance is run by David Ellison, son of Larry Ellison. You know, super rich billionaire guy. His sister is running Annapurna Pictures in Hollywood, and these are sort of some interesting new players in Hollywood that are doing different kinds of things, right? So,
Yeah.
But tell me more about Skydance.
Sure. So Skydance Media is a film, television, interactive, and animation content creator studio. We partner up with Paramount, Netflix for distribution, some other over-the-top companies. But basically, our goal is to make great worlds, great content, sort of AAA, you know, big tentpole properties and worlds. And
what are some of those properties?
yeah, so we've done things like the last Star Trek, Mission Impossible, the Terminator reboot, which will be coming out in 2019. On Netflix, we're just airing a show in a few weeks called Altered Carbon, which is based on a sort of a cyberpunk sci-fi series of novels by Philip Morgan. So we have a wide sort of range. Also, Grace and Frankie, which is a show on Netflix, which is very, very popular. So a little bit of variety as well.
And how did the gaming part get started here?
Yeah, so you know, the gaming part got started about 1.5 years ago. David he was looking around, he wanted to build an interactive unit, and he wanted to do it in a way that was a little different than how interactive is treated at most studios. You know, really wanted it to be its own standalone business and not just an ancillary consumer product kind of group. So, and he also saw that VR held a lot of promise for a company looking to break into the game space and sort of establish themselves without having to go toe-to-toe with established players in the console market or the mobile market. So David acquired a company called The Workshop, and a few people are here speaking, Laura Lynn and Peter Ackerman. Really talented group of developers, and they're down in Marina Del Rey, we're up in Santa Monica. And he acquired the studio with the goal of really shifting them to be a AAA VR studio. And then I came on board probably 8 months or so after that acquisition just to help with those efforts.
And the first game was Pwned?
Yeah, so we actually launched 2 games at the same time. One was Pwned, which is a arena-based shooter multiplayer game. It's non-VR, and the other one was Archangel, which is a big mech VR title, sort of living out that fantasy of piloting a big mech and you know, destroying things.
Now, Pwned didn't do quite so well, I guess, as you guys had hoped. I mean, it was their passion project, I guess, and they wanted to get it out and get it done. They did that, but
yeah. So you know, it's a solid game. You know, we sort of encountered, as a lot of people have, that sort of shooter market, the team-based shooter market is pretty dominated with Overwatch and then PUBG coming out. But we did want to sort of respect the creators at the Workshop and the project they had been working on for a number of years. That's sort of a theme throughout all of Skydance. We really do respect the talent and want to try to help them bring their visions to market. So we stayed with Pwned, brought it into market, you know, supported it. We've been supporting it for, well, good 6 months now, you know, just to see if that could gain traction. And even though VR is our focus, we're happy to have something, if it took off, that, you know, would also be a good line of business. Unfortunately, it didn't, and yeah.
So now you're gonna sort of double down on VR?
We are, so we're really focused purely on VR now, at least within our interactive studio. From a broader perspective, when you look at the interactive division at Skydance, we're also looking at co-developments and licensing deals to, you know, obviously get our content onto other platforms. But in VR, we're doing that in-house. We're working on The Walking Dead, and also an unannounced title, which will be coming out in 2019. And also more content for Archangel.
Okay. So yeah, talk more about Archangel. That was the VR title that came out at the same time as well, right?
Yeah, so that was, like I said, the big mech combat game that came out on the 3 premium headsets, Vive, Rift, and PSVR. And that game's been doing well for us. One of the things that I'm a big believer in is sort of trying to build a community and supporting our games after we launch them, as opposed to just a packaged goods model. So we are working on additional content for Archangel. There's basically, well, what we're doing is we're doing multiplayer mech-on-mech combat. So that'll be coming out middle of this year, and it gets the game, if you play the single-player game that's out currently, it's sort of on rails. It's an on-rail shooter with the narrative and story and all that good stuff. But with the player versus player mech combat, we're getting off rails and really embodying that fantasy of, you're piloting a big giant mech, and we have locomotion and torso twisting and just the fun combat that can go into that, adding sort of classes of mechs into the mix. Yeah.
So the interesting thing about Skydance is the first 2 titles are not based on its movie IP. Right?
Yeah.
So why?
We're gluttons for punishment. No, actually it was on purpose. It was by design. As I mentioned, we really are treating this as its own standalone business unit, not just an ancillary to the film or TV business. And because of that, it was really important that our first games out were original IP. If we had come out initially with one of our film properties or streaming properties, it really would have sort of set the tone that we're just sort of the child to the parent company, and we're just relying on their IP. Our mandate is to really do what's right for the interactive business, and if that means we work with some of our own IP, great. If it means getting IP and licensing inbound, like we did with The Walking Dead, great. And if it's original, also great.
So is there sort of like a broader, longer-term strategy then that you guys have around VR?
Yeah, so we really look at the next couple of years as an opportunity to establish ourselves as a AAA player in the VR space. Establish ourselves as one of the leaders, if not the leader in VR, with the hope that when the market, we believe the market will pop in a few years once we have additional hardware cycles, price points come down, frictions removed from the whole process, setting it up and everything. And we want to be there when the market takes off as one of the leaders. And we feel that's how we can position ourselves as a new interactive company.
So do you feel like you have to sort of be active now in order to be prepared later?
Absolutely. We're kind of treating it like almost a startup mentality where we have to be active now, obviously develop our tech stack, get that, in a really good place to have a competitive advantage over, when the market does mature, we'll start to see big players starting to move in when the P&Ls start to make sense. So one way to compete against them is to have amazing technology, expertise, understanding, the kind of things that you can't just buy right away, that you have to develop over time.
And this is a team of like 70 or so people? Or?
Yeah, the studio is close to 70. We've got about 50 developers, a little over 50 devs, and then IT and support staff and all of that. Yeah.
And that's enough for 2 major projects at a time, basically?
It is, so 2.5. We, because we're still doing content with Archangel, and we sort of restructured recently the studio to focus on smaller core teams. So the Walking Dead team, the unannounced title, and Archangel are kind of smaller core teams of about 10 to 12 people. And then we have a centralized resource pool that includes some centralized tech, and then just also people that, you don't necessarily need full-time on a project, right? So instead of double staffing, we kind of centralized all of that. And it's allowing us to, be a little responsible with our costs. And meanwhile, still building everything up.
So if you look at all the other studios in Hollywood, how would you sort of summarize Hollywood's view of VR and the opportunity?
So, I think there are certainly some believers out there in VR. It's, it's similar to what happened with mobile when that initially came out. It's like, is this an opportunity to generate reach for our IP, or is it an opportunity to generate revenue, right? And those are sometimes 2 different approaches to the business. Is it a marketing promotional play, or is it actually a revenue center, cost center, revenue center? So, with VR, we've seen some things, obviously Disney, they're big believers in it with what they're doing with The Void. Paramount, our partner on the film side, is definitely seems to believe in it. So I think people in Hollywood are viewing it as more of an opportunity to create great content, hopefully to get the revenue down the line. But whether it's filmmakers coming in who want to tell stories in VR, or the interactive side of gaming, or
yeah, Lionsgate seems very active, but they're doing sort of a different kind of strategy of just working with outside developers, right?
Yeah.
And for you guys, is that going to be part of the mix as well?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, with the overall interactive sort of division, we have our internal studio that'll be sort of our crown jewel. We'll look at that as developing some great in-house tech. But absolutely, we plan on working with other developers externally. We're talking with a number of people actually right now, whether that's VR, console, mobile.
And what's your view of, say, what's worked in VR so far?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's I think the two things that have worked so far: social play. But you look at Rec Room and the success that they're having. Social play is a big part of VR. I think it can help really drive adoption. Word of mouth is still the best vehicle for marketing in VR. So if you have something that has social play to it, it affords the opportunity for the guy or gal who has the VR set to tell their friends and hopefully get them on board. And AAA content, I think, really, unfortunately, there's a lot of sort of short experiences or things that don't fully fulfill the promise of the cost of VR, right? They're neat to try out, but they don't really justify why did I plunk down the money for this VR rig and set. So seeing more sort of high quality sort of games that have actual depth and replay value, seeing more of that come out. The ones that have done that have had success, and yeah.
So what are some of the interesting technologies you think are going to sort of come into VR over time as well? Like, I went to CES last week, and I saw another eye tracking demo. I saw several haptics, sort of touch or feedback into input systems for VR as well. There are these sort of second generation headsets coming along, and some of these have them, some of them don't. But over time, what are you more bullish on as far as?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that. There's on the hardware side, what are we going to see on like you said, the haptics front? There's a lot of neat stuff happening out there, but until it becomes a universal piece of sort of the hardware, it's tough to really validate putting a lot of resources into making something work with it, quite frankly. Yeah. But I think it holds huge promise. I mean, just bless you, on the biometric front alone, being able to track how the player is physically responding to what they're doing and adjust the game accordingly that opens up a whole new realm of opportunity that can only be done in VR. I think also, I'm really excited to see some of how characters and living worlds can evolve in VR, the technology for that. Bringing in some of the work that maybe is being done with AI in whether it's the medical field or the robotics field, how can you create characters and worlds that, and I think the previous speaker actually talked a little bit about this, that actually respond and adapt to the player and evolve. So you don't have to just do a lot of heavy scripting to actually have a story and a game that evolves with you. Those are kind of the two pieces that I'm excited to see.
So are you more excited about, say, VR slimming down and becoming wireless and standalone and less expensive? Or do you also want to see the high end of VR sort of get closer to the holodeck or something?
Well, the holodeck would be awesome, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's really interesting. We're seeing some like Santa Cruz from Oculus. Some things on the horizon that kind of bridge the gap between mobile VR and premium VR. I'm definitely in the premium VR side of things. Just that's the kind of content that I like to create. So I'm excited to see that hardware, you know, go lose the cameras, go inside out with tracking, you know, untethered, you know, when we get to the point, and this is all years down the road, but when we have processing power that can be equivalent to a PC in the headset, you know, I think all of that is pretty exciting. It does raise a lot of design challenges, you know, at least with the cameras, you can get a sense of sort of boundaries for the player. With the inside-out tracking, you're going to be, you know, if the player can walk anywhere in VR, you know, obviously you can map their room, but what kind of games do you make that encourage a little bit of movement, but don't that take into account all the variety of spaces that people can be playing in?
So Intel had an interesting announcement last week with this Intel Studios thing. They announced at CES where, you know, they're going to basically set up a big, gigantic 25,000 square foot, you know, studio in Hollywood, and they're partnered with Paramount, but they're inviting Hollywood basically to come and learn how to make immersive media, right? And not just for VR, but for things like, you know, interactive sports viewing as well, right? So, you know, what is that? How do you interpret that, or what does that tell you, I guess, about?
You know, to me, that's another sort of indicator that this market is heading in a promising direction. You know, to see somebody like Intel really investing on that level in, you know, highly immersive content, whether it's VR or, you know, for interactive or, like you said, sports. It's really encouraging, and I think it also highlights the reality that we're still in a phase of trying to figure out exactly what does and doesn't work in VR, right? What kind of content, other than games and viewing movies, you know, are on the mobile side, you know, what kind of content can VR unlock? You know, what new ways to experience things?
So The Walking Dead, you know, it's had some very successful mobile games. It's had some very successful Telltale series. Like, what do you think VR should deliver for the fans of The Walking Dead? That's, you know, I think going to be different. You know.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Just excited about this one. So, you know, I think the Walking Dead VR game, it needs to deliver something that, first of all, you can't find on any other platform. And secondly, it needs to really put you in that world of the Walking Dead. You know, it's one thing to watch a show or interact on a 2D screen and, you know, kind of click a button to, let's say, you know, put you know, some zombie guts on you so that you know, or walkers, I should say, walker guts on you so that you kind of blend in. But it's a whole nother thing if you actually have to do that in VR yourself and pull those guts out of a you know, a carcass. Not to be dark, but that kind of experience that you can only get in VR, where you're not watching it, you're not directing it, you are living it. And, you know, that's really our goal. And we actually, you know, it's not just lip service. We have an internal green light process. We had our Walking Dead game go through its initial proof of concept phase. And, you know, we looked at it and, you know, there was some good stuff there, but we really were true to ourselves and said, this is cool, but you know what, we can see this on other platforms. Like somebody could do this on another platform, whether it's mobile or console, PC. So we sent the team back to a new proof of concept phase. And, you know, that's one of the things I mean when I say this isn't a traditional Hollywood studio. You know, it's not just like, okay, here's the design, go and do it, come hell or high water. It's like we're really looking at, is this going to be something that moves VR, that can only be done in VR, and is true to the brand?
What works in VR is the immersiveness of it and being able to move around in 3D space, you know, move your hands, do all that sort of thing. I think the tethering is the big problem. There are two big problems I see. One is the price, and the second is the tethering. The tethering, like, there are certain games where if I turn away too far, and you need to in certain ones, there's like a dead zone behind you. You know what I mean? If you're not facing the sensors properly. I think that's a big issue, and it's being addressed totally. But I think those are the two really big hurdles as far as I can see.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, that really sort of highlights that whole promise of room scale, of being really in it. And you know, it highlights one of the design challenges in VR. If you're making a room scale game and you're spawning, you know, enemies behind the player, or requiring the player to really be 360 with how they're interacting with the game. That's great on a room scale headset, but how do you bring that over to something like PSVR, right? And you can do it. It means you may have to do some redesign or just take that into account with your control scheme. But to me, it's really interesting. There's all these new challenges in developing for VR, which is also part of what drew me to it. It's like the whole language of design and business is new. Yeah.
So are you sort of thinking that you need to design things that would go into VR arcades? Like, I mean, is that a good sort of stepping stone kind of for the VR market for you?
Absolutely. I think VR arcades, location-based attractions, there's sort of a couple of subsets within that category. I think that is a very, very strong piece of the business, or could grow into one, and it's a great way to introduce people to VR. The reality is, just as you said, the friction points, the price points, everything, it's a barrier. And I mean, even so any way that we can expose the general public to VR is awesome. And coming back to the social piece of it, designing, I think when you're looking at location-based entertainment, having it be multiplayer, whether it's co-op or PvP, really leans into that social element of VR. A lot of people, it always cracks me up, you hear people who really haven't tried VR talk about how unsocial it is. You put it on and you're locked away from everybody in the world. But if you've actually tried VR that has social play in it, it's amazing, right? You are really connected with other people. And I think that is a promise that you can double down in location-based.
Cool. And I guess AR is sort of getting a lot of excitement now. Are you guys sort of also getting excited about that? Yeah,
AR, that's sort of on our strategy for this year to identify like what is our approach to AR going to be. Or is that something that we're going to do internally, or are we going to find a great partner to team up with? It'll probably be the latter, but I think this is the year where we figure out what our approach and strategy to it is.
Thanks very much. That was a really great interview. So.